The Supreme Court heard arguments today in a case challenging the removal of hundreds of thousands of people from voter rolls in Ohio. In a moment, Jeffrey Brown will talk to Marcia Coyle of the National Law Journal about the questions the justices asked inside the court. But we begin with a report from Karen Kassler of PBS's Ohio station Idea Stream about what's at stake in the Buckeye State.
U.S. Army Sergeant Joseph Helly was in Iraq in 2006 and 2007 and in Afghanistan in 2009. But when he came home to Ohio in 2011, he found a battle he didn't expect. Helly showed up to vote that fall and found his name had been removed from the voter rolls.
I started crying. It was heartbreaking to be told that one of those fundamental rights that I put my life on the line for, raised my right hand for, that I wasn't allowed to exercise it. I was protecting it for others, but others weren't able to protect it for me.
Helly, who is now the mayor of Oak Harbor, a small village near Toledo, has joined the coalition of mostly progressive-leaning groups opposing the two-pronged approach Ohio has to maintaining its voter rolls. If a voter doesn't cast a ballot for 2 years, a postcard or mailer is sent to the address listed on the voter's registration. If the voter doesn't respond and then doesn't vote for another 4 years, the voter is removed from the voting rolls without further notice, whether the voter has moved or not. More than 4.6 million of those mailers have been sent to voters since 2011, the year Helly found out he was removed. At least hundreds of thousands of voters have been removed, but it's unclear exactly how many. Republican Secretary of State Jon Husted says the 2-year window and the mailers are part of the state's legal obligation to remove the names of dead, imprisoned, or otherwise ineligible voters.
It's us trying to say to the voter, gee, have you moved? Do you want to update your information? It's done to try to be helpful to the voter at helping them update their information, and also to make sure that we maintain the voter rolls, which is another piece of the law. So you have, in the end, a 6-year period to interact, to vote, to let us know that you still want to be on the voter rolls.
But those challenging the process say voting is not a use it or lose it right, and that voters can choose not to cast ballots because of illness, apathy, or other reasons, and not just because they've moved.
Failing to vote is a very poor proxy for someone moving. Close to 50% of Ohioans don't vote in every given election, but not close to 50% of Ohioans have moved. The number is much closer to 2%. So the Secretary is purging vast numbers of completely eligible voters just to try to target a small, tiny handful of people who may have moved.
But Husted says this method of voter roll maintenance has been in place in Ohio since 1994 with virtually no problems until the lawsuit was filed in 2016.
This process has worked very well in Ohio under Democratic and Republican administrations. Nobody in Ohio has expressed problems with this. It's only out-of-state folks who seem to have trouble with how we're implementing the laws in Ohio.
But the plaintiffs challenging the state, led by the AFL-CIO-affiliated A. Philip Randolph Institute, say they're doing so on behalf of Ohioans like Larry Harmon. The Northeast Ohio man is featured in a video produced by the ACLU, another plaintiff in the case. Harmon says that after several years of not voting, he discovered he'd been removed in 2015. That was the same year that many Ohioans who registered in 2008, when Barack Obama won the state, also found they had been erased from the rolls. The plaintiffs won an appeals court ruling that resulted in more than 7,500 ballots cast by voters who had been removed must be counted in the 2016 presidential election. Last August, the Justice Department under President Trump reversed the position it had taken under President Obama and filed a brief to support the state of Ohio's case. 7 states use a process similar to Ohio's, so potentially millions of voters will be affected by the court's decision. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Karen Kassler in Columbus, Ohio.
Marcia Coyle covers the High Court for the National Law Journal, and she was in the courtroom, as always, as the justices grappled with this potentially far-reaching dispute. Marcia, so start with the argument against Ohio's law. How was it made in court today? What laws were they looking at?
Okay, really, there are 2 laws that are at the heart of the dispute here. The National Voter Registration Act and the Help America Vote Act, which followed the National Act. Both were designed and intended by Congress to make voting easy and accessible. The challengers to Ohio's system, represented by Paul Smith today, argued basically the same argument that they had won in the lower court. Ohio is—
Stay with a winning argument. huh?
Absolutely. Ohio is going wrong with its system for removing voters from its registration rolls.
So what kind of reception did they get from the justices?
Well, I'd say the justices seem divided, but you never can really tell what's going on till the decision comes out. There was—
To say that they're divided is not a surprise, right?
That's
But
right.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's also a safe prediction,
Yeah,
too. Justices Kennedy and Breyer, for example, they spoke to the concern that states have about maintaining the integrity of voter registration rolls. That is something that states have to do. Justice Breyer, for example, said, well, if you can't use the fact that a voter hasn't voted in 2 years to send out these notices, what can you do?
Yeah.
And Mr.
So they're in essence supporting the Ohio.
Well, it sounds
sounding
that way. I mean, they're raising one of the major concerns here of Ohio. And Mr. Smith said, well, you know, Ohio is really one of only 8 states that uses the process that it uses. It's the most aggressive. There are other ways. I learned through this case that there is a national change of address database that keeps track of changes of address that are sent to postal offices. And he said states can compare their registration addresses with that database. So there was this concern about how can states maintain integrity.
And where did the challengers get their support from?
Justices Sotomayor and Kagan, for example. Justice Sotomayor is concerned about what she said appears to be the disproportionate impact of Ohio's process on cities and neighborhoods that have a high percentage of low-income workers who work odd shifts, have difficulty getting to the polls, and also on minorities. She pointed out there have been a number of new voter restrictions put in place by states that create even more obstacles. Justice Kagan looked at Ohio's argument that, no, it's not the trigger, the 2-year trigger that removes voters. It's the failure to respond to our confirmation notice that removes voters. She looked at it and said, what it looks to me like is failure to vote, failure to respond, failure to vote.
Yeah.
And she didn't quite agree that it was the cause of the removal was the confirmation notice.
So briefly, I mean, there's a lot on the docket for the court this term
Yes,
over
there
voting
is.
right and redistricting. But the implication, political implications, perhaps, of this particular case?
Well, as you probably know, Ohio is often a battleground
I
state
do, yes.
in national elections. So the number of voters who are purged from the rolls could make a difference in a close election. So it's being closely watched. And you're right, the court has 2 partisan gerrymandering cases. It may well see another partisan gerrymandering case out of North Carolina. It continues to get racial gerrymandering cases, voter ID. The whole election landscape is alive right now with these types of cases.
All right, this is all to be continued. Marcia Coyle, thank you as always.
My pleasure, Jeff.